Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem, the novel, Chapter 6, page throughout history. Anthony stood on the outskirts of Amiens, France. His leader, King Charlemagne, was at the cathedral, speaking with the bishop there. He hoped it would not take long. Something about the town of Amiens made him feel uneasy, like an air of evil was around. It made him fear for Charlemagne's life. As he stood near one of the buildings, Anthony was surprised when one of the monks came up to him from the cathedral. He was even more startled when the monk said to him, "Take this to Charlemagne. It is for his eyes only." He nodded when the monk handed him a message tube and ran off. Why would the monk need to hand him a message tube when Charlemagne was at the cathedral? He headed behind the building he was near and checked to see if the monk had indeed left. He then opened the message tube and unrolled the scroll in it. He was startled to find that the scroll had many strange symbols on it. In the pit of his stomach, Anthony knew this was a bad thing. Soon he felt lightning come from the scroll and knock him down. He felt something change in him. He looked at the scroll and said, "I've been bewitched!" As he felt the foul magic go through his body, he realized that the spell must have been meant for Charlemagne. He looked out to where the cathedral was and said, "I have to warn him of this treachery." He ran at full speed to the cathedral. He had to warn the king. If there was a plot to kill the king, he needed to inform him of the plot. He wondered if the bishop knew of the plot to kill Charlemagne. When he entered the cathedral, he heard a monk say, "Hello, Anthony. King Charlemagne has not finished his visit yet. The bishop had just gone to fetch something. Charlemagne is talking with some of the other monks about the tragedy that happened today." Anthony had remembered a tragedy had happened. When they had arrived, they had heard that one of the monks was found dead. In fact, he had noticed the casket lying in the front of the cathedral. He looked at the nearest monk and noticed a fearful look in his eyes. He said, "Who found the monk who died?" He noticed the monk turned away, like there was some secret he was keeping. A very dreadful secret. He looked again at the casket and did an unthinkable thing. He opened it. When he had done so, he wished he hadn't. Anthony was staring at a dead monk who had exploded from the inside out. It was gruesome, and something told him it wasn't humanly possible. More of the monks had gathered round, and he heard many remark about the sign of evil. Soon the monk who spoke to him when he entered said, "Young Anthony, you've exposed that a great evil is at work here. Take this sword and use it to find whatever is behind this. I hope it hasn't taken over the bishop, but it will be by the grace of God if he hasn't. Just be careful. I fear there are demons at work. May God be with you." Anthony nodded and took the sword he was offered. He went back to the main door and started up the stairs. Deep down in his heart, he worried about Charlemagne. If the bishop had been possessed by evil, then Charlemagne was in great danger. As he reached the top of the stairs, however, he felt as if the whole world was changing all around him. In the blink of an eye, he felt he was in a very evil place. But he felt safe. He turned to see two glowing figures glowing in a white light. He would have thought they were both angels, but one was obviously a woman. Yvette Kale watched as Anthony appeared in the surreal hall. When Alexandra had started this chapter, she appeared in the strange hall. When she first appeared, she tried to understand the two statues and the 6 empty spots. However, Anthony had appeared just as she was about to explore. She noticed as he turned to her and said, "Are you an angel of some sorts?" She looked at him and wondered why he asked that, when she noticed the white light surrounding her. She nodded and said, "In a way, I am a guardian angel for you. I can tell you that you are about to take on a very powerful evil." She was stunned when he said, "Is that why I see two of you?" She glanced for a moment, and then realized that if Richard was right about what happened to him, he wouldn't join reality in a while. She smiled and said, "That would be my husband. He will be there to help you when you need it. He'll be watching over you, and he will help you." She watched as Anthony then glanced from side to side, looking at the statues that were there. She watched as he turned to her and said, "Who are they? Were they other fighters of this evil?" She glanced at each statue and said, "I believe they were. Each one has tried to stop the evil in some way. However, I fear the eternal darkness has consumed them." She motioned to the obvious female statue and said, "Like her." She fell to the darkness as she tried to escape from a temple, hiding something that could defeat the eternal darkness. Yvette watched as he turned to another statue and said, "What about this one? It's not much, but the name on it says Pius Augustus." She felt her heart stop. Pius might have been a villain of the victim of the eternal darkness, but he went willingly. She just said, "Anthony, I know this may seem weird, but you need to take that tome over there." She motioned to the tome of eternal darkness, resting on a waiting skeletal hand. As he approached it, she heard the screams of the faces on the floor. She then said, "Don't worry, for my husband and I will be watching over you. We may have to use the very darkness we fight to defeat it." As he neared it, she heard him say, "I am already bewitched, but maybe I can stop it with this. Thank you, fair angel." She watched as he grabbed the book and disappeared. When he was gone, she just said, "Don't fail him. Don't let him fail, Richard. Don't let him fail." She then watched as the eerie hall that housed the tome disappeared from sight, and saw that she was returning to the present and the secret room in the Roivas estate. Now she knew that Anthony only had Richard to watch over him. Anthony cautiously stepped forward as he exited that odd realm. Knowing he had two guardian angels following him made him feel better. He also hoped the odd book would help him. He opened the book and was thankful when it appeared that every page was in his native language. However, as he paged through it, he could not find anything that would help him undo the spell. There was nothing that could help him. He couldn't even see any of the strange markings from the scroll. He then remembered that the bishop might be waiting up there. He made sure he had the sword ready before he topped the steps. When he reached the top of the steps, he was relieved and dismayed. The bishop wasn't up there, but as he stepped forward, he felt pain run through his body as the foul magic attacked him. When it stopped, he looked at his hands and saw a horrifying sight. It appeared like the life had started to leave his hands. They had grayed in color. He had to put that out of his head. He needed to find some sign of where the bishop went. His attention had been pulled to a small circle-like object. He walked over to it to see a triangle with a circle at each point. As he touched it, he saw it glow and disappear. He quickly opened the book and saw on a page for spells the circle of power was there. He realized he was one step closer to finding a cure for his curse. He then saw something on one of the shelves. It looked like a jar with strange blue etchings on it. As he picked it up, he felt it slip out of his hands and shatter on the floor. He picked up the pieces, only to discover a glowing etching was inside it. He watched as it disappeared in a flash of blue. He reopened the book and saw it had appeared on the page with the circle. Now he needed to find where the bishop went. He went back to the curved alcove and noticed an odd book on the shelf. He pushed it and saw the one shelf open. Behind it was a ladder. Anthony had to wonder why that path was hidden. He started to climb down in hopes of finding the bishop. When he reached the bottom of the ladder, he was shocked to see three obviously dead bodies walking. That was proof enough that the cathedral was under the devil's siege. He quickly moved forward and slashed the decaying creatures. They had looked like some of the people that had been buried in the catacombs under the church. He wanted them to return to their slumber and destroyed each one. With the last one he killed, he discovered another glowing rune. As it disappeared, he heard an unearthly voice say, "Hunterbuck." With the last dead men gone, he went into the door at the end of the hall. When he entered the room, he was horrified to see a monk being attacked by three more dead bodies. He admired the monk's determination to save himself as the monk struck the lead creature with the torch. He then watched in awe as the body was engulfed in flames, and the body struck a tapestry, burning it up. He quickly ran to the rescue, seeing the monk drop his torch. He quickly picked it up and set the two remaining bodies on fire. When he was done, he turned to the monk, whose only words were, "Thank you. Something is wrong with the bishop. Before he stepped behind that tapestry, he had said he had to get something special for Charlemagne. Before you go, take this." Anthony looked at the sword the monk handed him. It was better than the one he was carrying, and could probably handle the creatures better. He then heard the monk say, "By the way, the bishop dropped a small jar. The pieces should be on the floor." He knew the monk had mentioned that for a reason. Maybe the odd jar meant something. He searched the room with the torch in hand and found the pieces. With them in hand, he headed through the door that had been revealed. He emerged at the top of a stairwell, and he heard the groan and movement of what was one of those dead creatures. He held the torch, knowing it would help him more in the dark than the sword would. He started down the steps, only to see an odd stone tablet. He picked it up, only to briefly glimpse 2 words and a symbol. He read the 2 words aloud. Magomor. Item. He watched as it disappeared, and he figured it went into the book as well as the other runes he found. He then ran down the steps and struck the corpse at the bottom of the steps. As it fell, he saw the rune that was on the tablet briefly appear before vanishing in a glow of yellow. He opened the book again to see he now had 2 yellow runes and a blue rune. If they were all part of a spell, he didn't know how they worked together. He then opened the door and headed to the next room. As he entered the room, he felt his body get racked by pain again. As he recovered, he saw his body had deteriorated more. He then saw 2 more bodies advancing on him. He quickly pulled out the sword and destroyed the walking dead. When they were both gone, he stopped to survey the room. The first thing he noticed was the fountain in the corner. At first, he thought holy water came from it, but the foul odor of the water hit him and told him that was not the case. It was then he noticed the red jar filled with the foul water. He picked it up and decided that he would find the use of the 3 jars and hopefully repair the other 2. He then noticed a stone tablet which had an outline of the rune that was in the first jar. He looked over the tablet and saw only 1 word. As he said the word, Ulioth, the panel disappeared. A quick check of the book told him what he already suspected. 2 of the runes had been found had names. Now he needed the last one's name. He then saw the tapestry on the one wall. Remembering what he saw earlier, he burned it to find a hidden door. He quickly entered the door, feeling he was getting closer to the bishop. As he ran through the corridor, he was almost grabbed by one of the dead bodies. He inwardly cursed the narrow hall, since he could not swing his sword. He did remember the torch, and quickly set fire to the monster. Almost in an instant, the creature was dead. He paused for a moment then. Whatever was causing all this was starting to get to him. He could have thought he heard the thing laughing at him. In fact, the walls seemed a bit odd as well. It looked like something was flowing from them, something red. He shook his head for a moment, and then continued through the other door. Anthony entered a small library, and just as he turned from closing the door, he saw the bishop enter a door that slid close behind him. He ran forward and felt the floor sink under him. He watched as the panel reopened. He saw his chance and he leapt for it. However, when he left the panel, the door slid shut. There had to be a way to open the door. He looked down at the panel and saw the triangular pattern on it. He looked at the full urn and placed it right at the one point of the triangle. He watched as the panel lowered, but not enough to trigger the door to open. Now he knew he had to repair the other two jars. Once they were repaired, he could fill them with water and follow the bishop. He then noticed two more items in the room. The first was a stone slab that translated the last rune he had needed to know about. From it he learned the Anterbach rune meant project. The next thing he saw was a scroll. He picked it up and smiled. The scroll contained a spell called Enchant Item. From what he read, he had all the runes to make it work. It would also repair any broken item and enchant items. He knew just what he had to do. When he got to the fountain, he put the urn pieces together and said, "If I must use the devil's tools to defeat him, I must. May the Lord forgive me." He then cast the spell on each urn. He watched in awe as the urns became whole again. It may have been the devil's handiwork, but a righteous spirit could turn evil's tool into a force of good. He then filled the urns in the fountain and returned to the room with the panel. He placed the two urns on the panel and watched as the secret door opened. He started to enter the room, but decided to enchant his sword first. He had a feeling the more powerful weapon would help him very soon. He then entered the hall behind the secret door. As soon as he entered, he was glad he enchanted his sword. It gave off a blue glow as he headed for the far end. It also helped him destroy the walking corpse in the hall. With the large enchanted sword, he quickly destroyed the thing. He also started to wonder how the bishop had gotten past all these creatures. He even kept that in mind as he opened the door at the end of the hall. The second he entered the room, he heard the bishop say, "I knew you would return, Anthony, especially when you received my message. I knew that would bring you to me. You came in hopes of saving your king. However, you are destined to fail. Now, Anthony, it is time to meet your fate." Anthony watched as the bishop faced him. When he saw the bishop's eyes, he felt as if the world was coming apart. How could a man of the cloth forsake God? He then saw the bishop start to advance towards him. He had to act quick. With one swipe of his sword, Anthony knocked him back. He then heard the bishop say, "It's a shame you are here alone, Anthony. However, I am not alone." It was then Anthony noticed the two corpses on the floor. He watched as the one got up, and soon after the second one arose. Anthony quickly destroyed the two corpses and then said, "I will not let the devil succeed. You can join your dark master in hell." With that, he cut off the evil man's head. He then saw the bishop drop a key. He quickly picked up the key and said, "I must save Charlemagne before it's too late." The second he ran out the door, he felt the curse strike him again. He looked at his hands and realized that the curse had destroyed him more. He was becoming like the corpses he battled. He started to run as fast as he could to get back to the chapel. and the room Charlemagne was in. He knew the key most likely unlocked the door. However, as he ran, he almost ran into two more reanimated corpses. He quickly eliminated them in the evil bishop's private library and moved to the door out. The second he closed the door, Anthony heard a very odd stepping noise. He watched as a strange creature walked into his view. He watched the horrific creature as its tail wagged in the air. Anthony watched as the creature slowly moved back and forth. From what he could tell, the creature had no eyes. Inwardly, he thought all he had to do was run by it. As he started to run, he heard the creature squeal, and as he neared it, he saw a bright flash come from where the creature was. Soon, everything had changed around him. He was now in an otherworldly place. As he looked around, he heard a new voice say, "I think that thing heard you." He spun to see the other angelic figure he had seen earlier. The man appeared to be older than him, but not by much. Anthony looked at him and said, "Are you the other one's husband?" He watched him nod, and then he said, "So you can help me stop this curse?" He watched as the figure shook his head and said, "No, I can't. However, I will help you get out of here and hopefully rescue Charlemagne." He watched as the figure looked over the small island they were on. He could see 4 other islands, each with a glowing circle. He then saw the man look at him and say, "Maybe we can slow down the effects of the curse. When the circle in front of us glows red, run into it." He approached the circle and did as he was told. When it was red, he entered. Soon, he was on another island and saw a circle with a glowing red rune in it. As he neared it, he heard a strange humming sound. He then heard the other man approach as he said, "Anthony, wait for a moment. You need to know who you are up against." Anthony turned to face the man and said, "I am against the devil himself. He wishes to destroy Charlemagne. There is nothing more you can tell me." He was surprised to see the man say, "Your foe was once like you. His name was Pius Augustus. Long ago, he picked an artifact that turned him into a servant of evil. He's the one who plans to kill Charlemagne. If we can stop him, then his plan will fail." He saw an honest look of hope in the man's eyes. Anthony lowered his head and said, "If you feel we can do it, I'll help stop him. Right now we need to save Charlemagne. How can I slow down this curse?" He watched as the man pointed to the circle with the red rune. He nodded and stepped into the circle. Anthony felt as if his health was returning to him. As he stood there, he heard the man say, "Well, it looks like your health is restored, but not your body. Whatever spell they used, it is powerful. Right now, head for the purple circle, and then the glowing circle on that island. It will take you back. Just be careful of those things. They might not see well, but they can hear well. Be silent in passing them." Anthony made his way to the way out, and then said, "Sir, what is your name?" He listened as the other figure just said, "You may call me Richard." From what he remembered of the name, he knew it was a regal-sounding name. It inspired hope in him. He then ran into the portal out of the nightmarish realm. He reappeared in the hall he had transported out of, and decided to carefully make his way back to the ladder to the cathedral. As he made his way up, he saw a few more of the odd creatures. He even passed the monk he had saved earlier, but the monk shied away from him. He realized he must now look like some of the creatures that attacked the man. As he approached the ladder, he hoped he would get to Charlemagne in time. However, he was surprised to hear footsteps behind him. He turned and was grateful to see that Richard had also gotten out of that hellish place and would fight by his side. Richard Cale had finally phased into reality when Anthony had entered the hall with the ladder. He could sense something was going to happen. He also saw that Anthony had decayed more. He hoped that when they saved Charlemagne, they could reverse what happened to Anthony. When he finally caught up with Anthony, Richard said, "Anthony, maybe you should re-enchant your sword. I have a feeling we will need the power." He saw Anthony nod, and soon 3 runes appeared around Anthony. He knew what they did, and realized that now Alexandra had a way to fix her key. He then hoped that he would make it back to tell her. Once it was done, he heard Anthony say, "With the bishop gone, we will have no problems getting to Charlemagne." He then followed Anthony up the ladder. He was surprised that Anthony could still climb, given the state of his body. As he climbed, he hoped that Anthony's body wouldn't start coming apart. When they both reached the top, Richard saw a greenish barrier at the top of the steps. Before he could say anything, he felt the disorientation rack his body. He closed his eyes and said, "Not now. This can't happen now." He heard Anthony say, "What's happening? What deviltry is this?" Richard started to blink his eyes and saw that the barrier was now red. Richard also noticed that Anthony's sword was glowing green. Just as he got used to the scene, he felt the floor shake. He looked over at the far wall and saw a horrifying creature with 3 heads come walking through the wall. He stared at it for a moment and said, Deviltry is a good term, Anthony. I think this thing wants to keep us from getting downstairs." He then saw lightning shoot from the creature, and he quickly dived to the left. He was lucky. However, he could tell Anthony took a nasty blow. "Anthony, are you okay?" He was grateful when Anthony said, "Yes, but I feel very weak." Richard hoped Anthony would survive. Richard ran towards the monster and swung his sword, slicing off one of the monster's heads. The creature roared in pain and did its lightning strike again. This time, both he and Anthony dodged the lethal blow. Richard then shouted, "Anthony, slice off the heads. It may be our only hope." Richard then ran forward and lopped off the middle head. The creature roared again, and he jumped back, missed landing and fell to the floor. Richard felt the mistake would cost him his life, but Anthony had closed the gap and lopped off the last head. Richard watched as the creature managed to roar and die. Richard quickly got up, and with Anthony, slashed the remaining body to bits. It made him feel better, more sane. He then saw the barrier disappear. He heard Anthony yell, "We must get to Charlemagne!" Richard watched as Anthony ran down the steps and quickly followed. By the time he got down the steps, he could see Anthony had already destroyed a few more corpses. Richard wondered what happened to the monks, but that had to wait. He followed Anthony as the young man unlocked the door that Charlemagne was behind. Deep down he hoped they were in time, but he heard Anthony shout, "No!" Richard ran in, only to see Anthony collapse on the floor, and all the monks looking over him. He also felt two more grab him, and then he heard the monks say, "You were a fool trying to save him." He then watched as the monk looked at him and said, "Despite your faith, nothing can save you from the power of Chaturga." With those last words, he saw the monk erupt, and a strange creature with blade arms burst out. He then heard a familiar voice say, "Use him as your new home. It will be a fitting end for his meddling." He glanced in the corner and saw the bishop back in one piece, only to see him change into Pius Augustus. He started to fight his captors and saw the creature advancing. However, before it got too far, the figure froze, and Richard knew what was happening. The chapter was over, and he was returning to the present. He was thankful